Hello, my name is Travis Knapp. I'm going to be going over the flight scenario presentation, Football Crazy, for Aviation 430. So just very quickly, our scenario here, we're going from Minneapolis to Dallas with two non-pilot friends. One's asking a ton of questions, and the other one is kind of concerned about the safety of flight. And so it's creating this situation where I'm having to describe things and sell it to both of my friends about why it's going to be safe to make this trip. We are going to be in a light twin. My training aircraft's a Piper Seminole, so I'm going to assume that's what I'm taking. This is our route of flight. It's 740 miles. We might be making a fuel stop about halfway through. All right. So the first thing I'm going to try to sell to my friends is that I have done my proper planning and I am safe to fly this airplane by myself. So here's single pilot resource management just defined by the FAA in the Risk Management Handbook. A few things I'm going to do. I'm going to identify my risks and attempt to mitigate them. That's both external and internal to myself, like proficiency and things like that. Task management, I'm going to do all I can on the ground, and then I'm going to try to get ahead while I'm flying the airplane and continue to stay ahead of the airplane, programming frequencies, programming approaches, things like that. And I'm also going to be considering my ADM during this flight. Always keeping in the back of the mind, I can always land, I can always cancel, and then just trying to maintain situational awareness with things like ADS-B data and ATC services via flight following or an IFR flight plan. Good route planning is something that is super important, and mitigating the controlled flight into terrain and avoiding special use airspace so we can avoid things like jets and missiles and things like that. And then lastly, flight mitigation and automation. Flight management, just making sure that we're reacting appropriately to things that are happening in the airplane. And then automation, just knowing the limitations of the automation I'm using and then leveraging my automation to decrease my workload. So my two friends are going to be talking about the multi-engine and why it's different and how their friends might have said it's unsafe. And so we're just going to go through a few of these systems that are unique to multi-engine airplanes versus like a training airplane that we might have flown in together before. So first off is the landing gear system. So here's just a few of the systems that are incorporated into the landing gear that keep us safe. I'm really just going to focus on one here, which is our squat switch. And so here it is right here with our gear down. You see it's not compressed, right? This plate, when the oleo strut unloads, will press on this and allow the gear to come up. And there you can see we're airborne, and there it is pressed. So that allows us, when we're on the ground, it won't bring the gear up. Constant speed propeller. So just to very briefly go over this is a new control we have in the airplane. I'm controlling it in the cockpit with this lever, and that will adjust this spring, which just adjusts the amount of high pressure fluids that are going into the propeller. And then the propeller will spin at a constant speed and give us a more efficient flight based on whatever control inputs we're making. We have a new environmental system, so we actually have a gas burning heater, and that's going to be forward of the cabin to us, and we're getting some fresh air in from the rear of the fuselage. Okay, so talking about multi-engine flight and why it's a little bit different. So VMC is one of the big hazards that exists in multi-engine flight. It's minimal controllable airspeed. And so the danger that's presented with two engines is if one goes out, the other one tends to want to pull the airplane over because of all these factors that we're going to talk about. So here's some images of a conventional airplane, which we do not have a conventional, we have a counter-rotating one. So all these airplanes are rotating in the same direction, and it creates all these errors that if one engine goes out, typically a left engine, it'll be more likely to pull the airplane over. And you can see, just briefly, I'll show one example here of these thrust vectors. This one's closer to the fuselage. This one's further away. So that right engine would be more likely to pull us over. But because we have a counter-rotating engine on our airplane, these will both be equal, which makes it much more safer. And if we lose either engine, it won't be as dramatic. If we do have any emergencies during the flight, this is my emergency checklist we'll be going through that I've learned on my school at. Additionally, if we have any emergencies that aren't on this checklist, I'm going to open up the POH to the emergency tab, which is tabbed in red, so we can get there quickly. And then lastly, just want to discuss my aeronautical decision making here. Right, so systematic approach for pilots to consistently determine the best course of action. Hopefully, this is something I'm doing for us during the flight. But here are just a few of the acronyms I'm using. Um, PAVE, that's just something I do before our flight to make sure everything is safe and legal, and that I've mitigated everything that I could before the flight. Decide, we've talked about that earlier, but that's a big factor into aeronautical decision making. And then the 5 Ps, right? These are just things that are going to affect the flight. Here's a little diagram of them. And I'm going to look at those and I do my best to identify any risks or hazards that might exist in those 5 categories. And then lastly, I'm going to do AFRAT, which is just a risk analysis tool that assigns a numerical value to all of our risk factors. And then here are just my references that I pulled from my FAA handbooks. So I'm hoping that I sold this flight as being safe, and that I know the hazards that are going to exist on this flight, and I'm going to do my very best to mitigate all of them, and that multi-engine can actually be safer flying because we have 2 engines, and as long as we're operating the airplane safely and within its limitations, it can be a much safer form of flight. So looking forward to watching those Cowboys win this game.